When my fiancé slid a 40-page prenuptial agreement across the dinner table, his parents were smirking. They looked at me like I was a penniless gold digger trying to claw my way into their wealthy family. "Sign it, or the wedding is off," his father demanded, confident that I'd break down and beg. They thought I was just an ordinary, low-wage office clerk who lived in a cramped apartment and drove a beat-up sedan. They had no idea that the modest office I worked out of was actually the regional headquarters of the firm that owned their entire commercial real estate portfolio. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I simply pulled out my pen, made one small correction on the final page, and signed it. The look on their high-priced attorney's face when he read what I wrote was absolute pure terror. Follow my story until the end and comment below the city you're watching from so I can see how far my voice has reached. My name is Vivian Marlowe. I am 40 years old, and for the past 3 years, I have lived what most people would consider a painfully quiet, ordinary life. If you looked at me on a Tuesday morning, you'd see a woman commuting on the train, wearing comfortable flats, carrying a canvas bag, and working out of a modest, plain office space in the city. To the rest of the world, and to the man I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with, I was just a simple, low-wage office clerk struggling to make ends meet in an increasingly expensive world. When I met Julian at a local coffee shop 2 years ago, I didn't set out to deceive him. He saw me sitting with a pile of financial reports, sipping cheap drip coffee, and assumed I was a mid-level assistant trying to get through the work week. I chose not to correct him. After going through a painful past where people only valued me for what I could provide, I wanted to be loved for who I was, not what I owned. Julian was charming, attentive, and seemingly gentle. But as the months went on, a subtle condescension began to creep into his tone. He started making offhand comments about my modest background, acting like the knight in shining armor who was saving me from a life of financial obscurity. He truly believed he was the sole breadwinner, the superior partner in our relationship. And I let him believe it, until the mask finally slipped. The shift in our relationship became impossible to ignore the evening Julian invited me to meet his parents. He insisted we dine at L'Etoile, a grand, high-end restaurant in the heart of downtown that required reservations months in advance. "It's time you met my family, Vivian," Julian told me with a patronizing smirk. "But try to dress nicely. My parents are used to a certain standard, and I want them to see you're capable of fitting into our world." I knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted to parade me in front of his wealthy, old-money family as his humble project, the plain girl he was graciously elevating. So, I decided to give him precisely what he expected. I wore a simple, off-the-rack navy dress and my oldest winter coat, intentionally leaving behind any hint of sophistication. I wanted to see how his parents would treat a woman they perceived to have nothing to offer them. When I arrived, the coldness in the private dining room was immediate. His father, Richard, barely looked up from his glass of vintage wine, while his mother, Eleanor, gave me a slow, judging sweep from my sensible shoes to my unstyled hair. Their greetings weren't warm or welcoming. They were polite interrogations. They asked passive-aggressive questions about my family background, made snide remarks about my modest salary, and dropped subtle hints about how Julian deserved someone from a proper background. I sat through the soup course in quiet dignity, watching 3 people judge my entire worth based on fabric, titles, and perceived status, completely unaware of the storm they were brewing. Just as the main course was being served, the atmosphere in the room shifted from polite arrogance to calculated aggression. Richard set his fork down, wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, and signaled to the waiter to clear the table. He didn't offer dessert. Instead, he reached into his leather briefcase, pulled out a thick, formal manila folder, and slammed it down on the table right in front of me. "Let's stop pretending, Vivian. Richard said, his voice flat and devoid of any warmth. Julian has a bright future, and as a family, we have assets to protect. We won't allow our hard-earned wealth to be diluted by someone who brings nothing to the table. He opened the folder, revealing a 40-page document drafted by their family legal team, a prenuptial agreement. As I flipped through the pages, the sheer cruelty of the terms became undeniable. The contract explicitly stripped me of any right to shared property, demanded a strict division of lifestyle costs where I was expected to pay half of expenses I couldn't afford on a clerk's salary, and included humiliating clauses assuming I had zero personal assets or intelligence. It even stated that in the event of a divorce, I would walk away with absolutely nothing, not even the gifts Julian had given me. "Sign it now, or the wedding is off," Richard demanded, confident that I would break down, cry, or beg for mercy. I looked over at Julian, expecting even a flicker of hesitation or defense from the man who claimed to love me. Instead, Julian just sat there, nodding smoothly, avoiding my eyes. "It's just business, babe," Julian whispered, his voice dripping with synthetic sympathy. "If you really love me for who I am, and not my family's money, you'll sign it." I stared at the thick document, feeling the weight of 3 pairs of eyes locked onto me, eagerly waiting for the tears, the outburst, or the desperate pleading. But the breakdown they anticipated never came. Instead, a deep, icy calm settled over me. I reached into my bag, pulled out my own silver fountain pen, and began systematically turning the pages of the agreement, reviewing every single line with meticulous precision. Richard let out a quiet, mocking chuckle, assuming I was merely putting on a futile show of control. What he and Julian didn't realize was that I wasn't just skimming legal jargon, I was analyzing the exact legal structure of their family's wealth. Buried in the back schedules of the prenup, their attorney had listed all of Julian's family assets to prove what they were protecting: their luxury residences, their investment accounts, and their crown jewel, the flagship commercial headquarters of their family manufacturing business. My eyes lingered on that final page. Attached to it was a standard cross-default clause regarding their commercial lease liabilities. I smiled inwardly. I knew that address by heart. It was the prime commercial real estate property whose master lease had been acquired 6 months ago by Marlowe Holdings, my company. They were so blinded by their own arrogance, so eager to protect their empire from an ordinary clerk, that they hadn't bothered to check who actually owned the ground beneath their feet. Without saying a single word, I turned to the final signature page. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I simply unscrewed my pen, wrote a swift, decisive addendum right above the signature line referencing the master lease terms, and signed my full legal name with unwavering confidence. I slid the folder back across the polished table toward Richard and his family. The smug satisfaction on Richard's face instantly vanished as he pulled the folder toward him. Sitting right beside him, their high-priced family attorney leaned in, eager to verify that the ordinary clerk had submitted to their demands. But as the attorney glanced down at the handwritten addendum and my full signature, his face drained of all color. The pen slipped from his hand, clattering against his crystal glass. "Mr. Marlowe." "Wait," the attorney stammered, his voice trembling so violently that Julian and Richard both sat up in alarm. "What did you just write here?" "What's wrong with you?" Richard snapped, growing impatient. "She signed it. The girl accepted the terms. We're protected." "No, sir, you don't understand," the attorney whispered, frantically flipping back to the lease schedule documents attached to the end of the prenup. His eyes darted back and forth between the legal text and my face in absolute terror. "Vivian Marlowe. As in Marlowe Holdings. She isn't an assistant. She is the sole owner and CEO of the commercial trust that owns the master lease on your corporate headquarters." A suffocating silence fell over the table. Julian stared at me, his mouth slightly open, completely unable to process the words coming out of his lawyer's mouth. Richard's arrogant posture instantly collapsed. Their entire family business, which was already privately struggling with severe cash flow issues and mounting debts, relied entirely on the favorable lease terms and silent leniency provided by my corporate group. The very empire they were so desperately trying to guard against an ordinary clerk was sitting entirely in the palm of my hand. The tables hadn't just turned, the ground beneath their feet had completely shattered. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly from cruel arrogance to sheer, unadulterated panic. Julian's mother let out a soft gasp, clutching her pearl necklace, while Richard's face turned from pale white to a deep, embarrassed red. "Vivian, darling," Richard stammered, his booming, authoritative voice breaking as he fumbled for words. "There's clearly been a massive misunderstanding. We were just testing your dedication to Julian. A family of our standing has to be careful, you see." "A test?" I asked, my voice cool and sharp as ice. "No, Richard. You showed me exactly who you are when you thought I had nothing." Julian reached across the table, his hands shaking as he tried to grab mine. "Vivian, please. I didn't know about the lease, I swear. We can throw this prenup away right now. I love you for who you are. I always have." "You stood by and let your parents humiliate me, Julian," I said, sliding the engagement ring off my finger and placing it gently on top of the prenup folder. "You didn't love an ordinary clerk, and you certainly don't deserve the CEO." I stood up, adjusted my coat, and looked down at the three of them. "As for your corporate headquarters, my legal team will be reviewing your master lease first thing Monday morning. The silent leniency on your late rent payments ends today." Over the next few months, their world unraveled. Without my firm's leniency, Julian's family was forced to sell off their luxury properties to cover their mounting debts, downsizing dramatically just to stay afloat. They tried calling and begging for forgiveness, but the door was permanently closed. Walking away from that restaurant was the single most liberating moment of my life. I packed up my modest apartment, handed over my responsibilities to a trusted executive board, and relocated to a quiet, breathtaking coastal city in Carmel. Sitting on my porch, listening to the crashing waves, I realized that true wealth isn't about status, designer clothes, or grand titles. It's about having the power to protect your self-respect and surround yourself with people who value your heart, not your bank account. With the financial freedom I possessed, I established a foundation dedicated to providing legal aid and financial education to women who find themselves trapped in abusive or manipulative relationships. Transforming my pain into a shield for others gave my life a sense of purpose no corporate victory ever could. Looking back, I am grateful for that prenup. It exposed the truth before I made the biggest mistake of my life. It reminded me that you should never let anyone make you feel small just because you choose to walk quietly. Now I want to ask you, what would you have done if you were standing in my shoes that night? Would you have signed that document? Or would you have walked away instantly? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click on the next video appearing on your screen right now for another incredible story. Thank you for watching, and take care.